Good afternoon, everyone. I am Angel Roslegara, and I will be the one to discuss the topic developing interpretive argument and validity argument. An effective way to develop an assessment and an associated interpretive argument starts with the conclusions and decisions included in the proposed interpretation or use and works backward to the kind of assessment and the inferences required to support the proposed conclusions and decisions according to Beckman and Palmer 2010 and Kane 2006. Assessment here is associated with interpretive argument. Interpretive argument here is somehow compared or related to the corresponding task or performance that the assessment established. So before going on to conclusions, we have to consider first what kind of assessment we are trying to employ, we are trying to give to our students that required support from of interpretive argument. For example, here, if the goal is to measure student mastery of spoken English, we can begin by identifying the range of performances and contexts that are of interest. We could then develop an assessment plan specifying the kinds of tasks to be included in the assessment and the criteria to be used in evaluating responses to these tasks. So, as a teacher, if our goal is to measure the capacity of our students to speak a specific target language or the mastery of spoken English, we could then develop an assessment that specifies the kind of task included in the assessment and to be used in evaluating the students. Here, we have several options in developing the assessment and the interpretive argument. These are the options in developing assessment and interpretive argument. Other options. The first one is the most direct approach would involve observing extended performances in which the examinee is required to use the language effectively in one or more real or simulated situations. A less direct approach would involve observing a large number of briefed, structured performances in which the examinee is required to use the language to achieve some specific goal. This approach is very evident to the assessment and interpretive argument because you are observing an actual performance of the person, of the examinee that requires to use the language in a current situations. The examinee here is required to use the language to achieve some specific goal. Because the goal here is to observe the performance of the examinee using the language. So, the examinee was given in a simulated situations where he or she can use the language effectively. The development of the assessment and the associated interpretive argument is likely to be iterative. First, we develop a preliminary assessment plan and a general version of the interpretive argument that would lead from the observed performances to the conclusions and decisions to be made. Here, first, of course, we have to think first what kind of assessment we are going to give to our students, and later on the interpretive argument of that assessment. The second is we develop a validity argument by evaluating the plausibility of the interpretive argument in terms of the coherence of the argument and the plausibility of its inferences and assumptions, particularly its more questionable assumptions, in light of all available evidence. If gaps or weak links are identified, it may be necessary to adjust the interpretation and or the assessment or to conduct additional research. After developing the preliminary assessment plan and later on the interpretive argument, validity argument follows. Validity argument evaluates the plausibility of the interpretive argument. Plausibility means the truthfulness or the effectiveness of interpretive argument to the assessment itself. The third one, we restate the interpretive argument and the validity argument and repeat the evaluation of the interpretive argument until the validity argument provides adequate support for the plausibility of the interpretive argument or the interpretive argument is rejected. An interpretive argument that survives all reasonable challenges to its inferences and assumptions can be accepted, with the caveat that new challenges may arise in the future. As what I have understand, we have to restate or change the interpretive argument and the validity argument if the interpretive argument is not in line anymore with the assessment, because validity of it will be questioned. Validity here provides adequate support for the plausibility of the interpretive argument. So the next one are some examples of the assessment and interpretive arguments. Observable attributes, performance assessments. First one, simple inductive inferences can be used to draw general conclusions about people based on samples of their performance. If we observe a child riding a bicycle with ease, we can reasonably conclude that the child can ride a bicycle. If we observe a student solving quadratic equations, we might conclude that the student can solve quadratic equations. This is very basic and useful way to draw conclusions about competencies, skills, and dispositions of students. These are the evident examples of performance assessments of students, which is very understandable. The next one, observable attributes can be defined in terms of how well persons can perform some kind of task or how they respond to certain situations. Example given, how persistent they are in trying to perform an assigned task. Performance assessments or observable attributes can help us define more how good a person is able to perform that kind of task given to them and how persistent they are trying to perform that kind of task. The next one is quantitative observable attributes. The observed performances are scored using some scoring rules which reflect the intended interpretation of the observable attribute. The value of the observable attribute can be defined in terms of the average score over domain of. So, performances are scored or rated using the scoring rules, which will reflect now to the interpretation of what they have observed from the student. The last one is observable attributes are basically simple, inductive summaries from observed performances to a large domain of possible performances. Yet the definition of observable attributes raises many questions about how the target domain should be defined, according to Beckman and Palmer 2010, Shalhoub Deville 2009. And that's all my report. Thank you for listening. Thank you.